Hello and welcome back. This is Sherry with Heart and Soulful. I'm back in the studio today with another new gel print project. So if you are joining me for the very first time, welcome. I hope you enjoyed this video and the series. Give me a thumbs up if you do. And if you haven't already, click on subscribe and the little bell so you'll know when I post a new video. And also say hello down in the comments and let me know that you're new to my channel. So I have been working on a series for several weeks now on things to do with gel prints. I'm going to put a link down below in the description for the entire playlist so you can start at the beginning. The first few videos were creating gel prints and then how I prepare them to do in projects by creating some of these stripy papers. And then in this video, I actually did not use the stripy papers. I actually used some gel print scraps to create this one. In the last video, I did the shadow boxes and I asked for opinions about what my next project would be. And I had mentioned that I had made a shadow box out of an old book, and that was this shadow box. So that was my most requested to do next. And so I wanted to go ahead and maybe improve on the one that I had done when I did this one. I had made this piece of art that was an odd size, and it was a collage using gel prints and painting techniques and found objects. So I needed something thicker than a regular frame or leave it without glass or anything in front of it. So I had just scrounged around my studio for things I had. This one, I used just a piece of recycled plastic because I didn't have the right sized piece of glass. So I wanted to kind of do one that was really like a legitimate shadow box that would open and close. This one is completely sealed. I did it to fit the artwork and then just glued the top of the book closed. So you could do that without having it open like I did here. Or I found a way that I want to show you today to make this type. Now, I recorded this video and it was very long. I edited it down to just about an hour, but I was rewatching it and re-editing it. I really felt like I could do a more concise, shorter version and just show you nuts and bolts how to make this rather than watch the whole creative process, including creating these little collages. So that's what I'm going to try to attempt to do today in today's video. So I'm not going to upload this video. It's really long and kind of tedious. And it was, again, kind of an experiment. I was actually doing this in real time, first time for myself. So I wanted to show you the finished ones, and then I have another book that I'm going to do for this demonstration. So I did use Reader's Digest books, and I had two, and I had two pieces of recycled glass from picture frames that were 4x6 pieces of glass. And so that worked out perfect for this size book. Now, if you're doing this project, you are going to have a different size book and you may have a different size piece of glass. So I'm going to kind of go over what to look for in as far as when you're hunting for things to use and show you what I did, which is totally different than this look. Okay. So I think it just can apply to a lot of different styles of art, whether you're doing vintage kind of things or grungy things, or like these are more colorful and abstract kind of art. So you need a book, and then you're going to need a piece of glass. And when you look for your piece of glass, you want to make sure you have enough space around your entire book to be your frame. Now, if you compare to this book, I was able to cut this piece of plastic, but my artwork, I did not want to crop any of it. I really there were parts on all the edges that I wanted to see. So I needed to find a book, and this book was barely big enough for that piece. When I look for it, I'm going to measure, when I measure the size of my book, I'm not going to measure from here to here for the width, or from top and bottom even, because your cover is actually bigger than your book block. So what you want to measure is your actual book block. So you're going to measure from the spine to the edge of the pages, and then the same thing here, you're going to measure from here to here. So you see, you probably have anywhere from 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch of book cover that's larger than your book block. So keep that in mind. I would want at least, probably in this one is about as minimal as I have, and I probably have just maybe 1/4 of an inch of book block that is larger than my piece of artwork. So this was not optimal, but I do like that I was able to see the whole thing. In this case, I could allow myself a larger frame. When I approached these, I did not even have an idea for what I was going to put inside, which makes it easier in a way because then you can create your artwork to suit the frame that you're designing. So for size and all of that. So you do have some limitations, again, based on the size of your glass. So if I chose this book and I wanted maybe a little bit larger glass, I could really probably only go to maybe 4¼ by maybe 6½. So that's an odd size piece of glass anyway. You're going to be recycling, upcycling old picture frame glass. In my case, I did, unless you have the tools to cut your own glass. So 4x6 is standard, 5x7, you would need a larger book, okay? You can do smaller, which I'm going to show you in the book that I did. Now, when I approached these, I wanted just everything centered. So you could, for example, have a smaller piece of glass and have it off center, which is what I'm doing in the demo that I'm going to show you. So this I centered, and I can open this from the back so you can kind of see how large my actual frame ended up being. There's not that much room. So you need a thickness to be able to work with to encase your glass and your piece of artwork. So you'll need a book. The artwork can come later. You're going to need an X-Acto knife, a metal ruler. I use a sewing ruler also. So it doesn't necessarily have to be metal, but you're going to be cutting against it, so that's usually best. You're going to need some type of PVA glue. I used my bookbinding glue, which is a neutral pH. So if you want this to be archival, just make sure the glue that you use is archival. And then I also used art glitter glue for this project, and that is also archival. And then what else did I need? My little magnets. I'll put a link for those. I just got those on Amazon. You get a whole thing of them for, it was like $6, I think, something like that. So some little magnets. You can do a different type closure if you want. You know, maybe you attach something that has like a little strap enclosure kind of deal, and it buttons or snaps or whatever you want to do. But I just chose to keep it simple and use this magnet situation here. So you'll need that, and then you'll need some type of hanger. On the one that I did, I didn't have any of those hangers around, and so I actually just drilled a couple of holes and put this on before I glued everything together. So you don't have to have a lot of materials to do this. It's hanging in my studio, so no one would even notice that this is not glass. Okay, so I think that's it for materials, unless I forgot something. And then we'll just get started on the actual construction. So for this one, I went to an antique store yesterday looking for another Reader's Digest. I went to some thrift stores, didn't find one. So I ended up, of course, finding a few other things, some old books to make journals out of and that kind of thing. But I ended up finding this cute little, I bought a couple of old picture frames that, you know, I paid more than like a thrift store price for them, but I liked the size of all of these picture frames to rob the glass out of them. And then I can use the picture frames, I can still use these, but putting, you know, maybe more contemporary art in them. So I kind of like to mix things up. Like I think this frame, which is really old, will look really nice with this piece. So I'm buying some picture frames to rob, you know, the glass, and then use the frames for other things too. The other thing that I use old picture frames is empty ones like this, is to create displays for my jewelry. So for me, I didn't mind paying a little extra for some frames that I liked. This one I really loved. Again, it's really a simple design, and it's going to look really cute even with, you know, some gel print pieces in them would look nice. But I loved the glass. The glass is actually a curved, I don't know if you can see this, but it's actually a curved piece of glass. So I thought this would be really nice to use in an old book, because then I'm keeping the vintage thing going. So I've started this one. I'm going to use this little piece of glass. The book was a book that was just given to me. So, you know, normally I think in an antique store, you're going to pay $5 to $10 probably for an old book like this. But it was not this color. And so I wanted to kind of show that if, you know, the Reader's Digest books are fun because they have these fun patterns. And I like mixing pattern on pattern, as you know. And so if you look inside at the artwork I actually created, I used the cutout part of the cover and swapped them, and then created a collage. I know there's a glare. I'm trying to keep you from seeing that light bulb. But I created then a collage using an old key in my gel prints, and used the substrate, the book cover, as the substrate. So I really love how these turned out. So I am going to have to find some old Reader's Digest, but this one is you know, and just an old book. So I wanted to mention that the color, if you find an old book or a new book, you can At thrift stores, you can find new books that people have just read and are finished with. So they're in great shape for a shadow box. And the pages are all, nice and even and all of that. So those would be great to buy, or garage sales, that kind of thing. But if you don't like the cover of it, because when I'm hunting for things like this, I like the fact that this has this on it, so it looks like an old book, instead of being like a newer book would be solid, maybe one color all the way around. See, I have a couple of other books here. These are the two that I found at the antique store yesterday that I want to turn this one into an old journal, a little journal, and this one too. But this one I could have cut out just a smaller piece of glass and put a piece of art here. This one, again, is just one color, the whole cover. So, I could do that and also, put a piece of glass here. But depending on what art you want to put inside, maybe you want it to be simpler. But I just like pattern on pattern and mixing things and being a little busy. So this one was one I was really tempted to cut, because this would make a really nice looking frame. And it would also even look nice to be hanging, with my others that I've already done. So this one, I don't know. I might. It was from a college library. It has some stamping on it, which we don't always like to see. So one thing that you can do is, I actually did this on another book, is I sanded this off with just some sandpaper and got that off so that, you don't see that. Unless maybe you like that, want to leave it, because you're going to end up seeing it, around the edge. So I don't know. I may end up turning this one into a shadow box too. We'll see. So get your book. This one, I did not like the color, so I actually stained it. It was kind of this little weird green color, which I like green, but it made it kind of light for a picture frame for me. And it had some really bad staining on it, even though this is the back and it would be hanging this way. I just wasn't in love with it. So I used some spray stain that I had and just, poured it out of the bottle and just went over the whole thing with it. And it probably should be sealed. I may end up doing some like door lens wax. I wanted it to dry really well. So I may get my door lens cold wax and wax that so that it's protected and doesn't, come off, because this is just, a water-based stain. So you can do that. I wanted to point that out just so that if you don't like your cover, you could paint it wild or, whatever you want, and you still know it's a book. The other thing you can do is, if it's solid and you want that binding look of black along the edge, this is just gaffer tape, and I'll put a link for that. But it's like a cloth, tape. And so you could, do that over, if you get wide enough, that would wrap around your spine and have that look on it. I won't do that on this one, but I'm just giving you ideas. Maybe you decoupaged your gel prints on it and wanted that black, edge there. Then that would be fun and colorful too. So you get your book. You also, I like to have some kind of clips. So the first thing that I did to start is just figure out where your glass is going to go. So because this glass, and it's barely going to fit on this one, but I think it will work. This had like a decorative border around, not decorative. They had a little black border around where the title and author was in this particular book cover. So I thought, I want to cut just that out. And in order to cut out, including the black line, I guess I could have left the black line, and that would have left more border around my frame. But cutting that black line out, it's capturing it enough on the sides. I don't know if you could see that. It's going to capture more on the sides than it is on the top and bottom, but I think it's going to be enough. You want your cutout to be a little bit smaller than your glass so that your glass will sit behind it and not fall through, okay? And then the next thing we need to do, so once you figure that out, and on the other ones, I did that from the inside. I figured out, centered where I wanted my glass. And sometimes your glass might not be a perfect squared edges. It might be a little imperfect in its size. So kind of putting it where you want on your cover, and you're going to not see this. You can just draw with a pencil around the actual glass, and then you need to come in a little bit from that. So if you were to draw this on the back, your glass, then you would take your ruler, and that's where the sewing ruler comes in handy. Because then you could go around this edge and, you know, look at like a 1/4 of an inch and go around and make it a 1/4 inch all the way around smaller than your glass. Okay, you want to be smaller than your glass. So this case, I had this decorative thing, and so I just used that as my guide to cut that out. So it ended up being where this will stay in, where it needs to be. So the next thing I need to do is I need to separate enough pages for the thickness of my glass, because my glass needs to be held in here. So I want my glass to fit inside these cutout pages, and then when it's sandwiched, these all have to get glued down. Then when this is going to be my box, it will be held in. So when I get further along, you'll see. So you need to have a 1/4 inch all the way around-ish, smaller than your glass for your opening. And then the size of your glass and the thickness of your glass in pages that you've held out. Okay, so my next step for this, I'm not going to glue these together yet. My book block is going to be the sides of my shadow box. Okay, so I have my front with the glass, but then I also need a back for the artwork. So I'm going to take the thickness of my substrate, and in my case, it's probably going to be at least the thickness of, this is just some matte board, and then I make collage on top of it. If you're going to do something 3-dimensional, obviously is the reason you need a shadow box. That can be whatever thickness you have here. So you don't have to worry about that as far as putting it in. You just need the thickness of your substrate. And then if you want to maybe put a backing on that. When I did these two, I did this one first. And I was really good about creating this thickness here of my actual substrate. But you can see that my backing is this piece. And in my case, let's see if I can do this without pulling it off. I decoupaged some book page and music paper and that. And then I used this on top, and then it even gets thicker with the key. So your thickness can be, bigger, but that edge, whatever that thickness is, how many pages you need to hold out. So this one sits flush because I was really good about calculating that. On this one, I was just eyeballing both of them, and I got lucky on that one. This one, I ended up making it deeper. So I had my substrate, which was the same as the other one, but I still had a little room here. So I just put another piece of matte board, and that just keeps it clean there. And then everything's flush. The other thing that I needed to consider is the thickness that I'm holding out. I want it to be the thickness of this magnet. So if you're going to use a magnet, this is 2 millimeter thickness. So that's about the number of pages that I've held out. So that was the other thing to consider. So your artwork, your magnet, whatever your closure you might need. So we're going to hold out those pages also. So I just took then a piece of, this is recycled shipping label sticker backing. So I just put a piece here. I've held out those pages, and I have these pages held out. Now, the first thing I did before I clipped those out of my way is my opening in this book block needs to be a little bit bigger than this opening. Otherwise, I'm seeing the sides are right there, and may be a little proud of this opening. So I want it to be a little bit bigger of a cutout, but not as big as that piece of glass. If I do it the size of the piece of glass, the glass would just fall through. I need the glass to be sitting on top of this, framed by this section so that it sits flush. And then when this is glued down also, my glass is just flush and encased between this book block and the cover. So this will all end up in the end being not removable. But you can get in to clean it, because once I've cut this opening, I'll be able to clean it from this way or from this way. So I could do that on the other ones if the artwork is not there. So I'm going to go ahead. So I drew what I closed the book with everything flat, just drew with a pencil my opening. And then I can adjust that and do some measurement that's between the opening and the size of my glass. So if I were to put my glass here, it's actually a little bit bigger than all my pencil lines. Now, this is going to be tricky because this glass is, my dimensions were so tight. I could have made this maybe a little bit smaller. In your case, you have more control over that. I was trying to cut that border out. So I have to just be really careful and not cut too much away. So before I cut, I have my lines drawn so I know what I'm going to be doing. I need to make these one unit so it's easier to cut these. So I found the easiest, quickest thing to do is you don't have to glue all the pages solid, because then they're glued together and that would be even harder to cut through. So I'm just going to glue the sides. So with a paintbrush, you're just going to use your PVA glue, and this only has one coat at this point, which is enough that it glued those together. So you want to glue them together, protect the other side, and then you could put a little bit of weight. I wouldn't put it too heavy because you want this all, when it's closed, to still be like the book and not too kind of squished. So you just glue those together, keeping them even. You want to, make sure your book's always going to be kind of squared up. And then I'm ready to cut these out. So I just need to take my time with an X-Acto knife and my metal ruler, and I'm going to cut through all these layers and not this layer. So you might want to put something like a piece of cardboard. I have one that I've been using, so that I don't go all the way through to these pages. These are going to get cut out, but they're going to be cut out in the end a little bit larger again. They need to do the same thing where they have something to sit on as your piece of artwork. So we'll do that after. So next step is to cut these out. So I will be back when I have these cut out for you. Okay, so I'm back and I've cut out my pages out of the book block. So now I have my inside where the artwork will go. So the next thing that I need to do is I could go ahead and glue this together, which I think I will. I need to wait and do this. I want to glue the glass in as late in the game here as I can, because if I need to make any adjustments and that sort of thing, I would want access to this. But you can see how when you're cutting it, you want to be a little bit inside your frame here and not where you see too much of it. I did have an idea when I did the last ones as an alternative, is you could cut all of this out the same size as your entire glass. This is where the glass is going to fit inside, but your glass would fall through. So what you could do in that case, if you don't want to see your kind of tattered book edges, which I do like, and so that's why I cut them a little bit in so that my glass will sit there. You could put use something else as your sides to your shadow box. If you look at an actual shadow box and how it's made, there are 4 pieces inside here, and those pieces, one, the frame outside, if you can see this edge, this is your smallest opening so that your glass sits on top of that, doesn't fall through. And then it's held in place by these 4 pieces that go around the edge. So you could use something like foam core board. I have some black foam core that I could use. This is a piece of MDF. You could use something, cardboard, whatever, and have it covered or painted and have that be your spacer that keeps your glass forward, and then your artwork at the back. So it would be a piece that is the thickness less than your frame. So that's kind of what we're doing here, except that I'm just including that piece, that thickness, in my actual book block. So if I cut it out bigger, I would need to put something, that was a thickness that my glass would sit on top of. And same with my artwork in the back, from the back. So now I have to cut the place for my artwork. So what I could do is I could go ahead again and trace my opening. And for my artwork to sit on this actually needs to be a little bit bigger. So it could be any size, I could cut it quite large if I wanted, but the actual part part you see is only going to be what you see in this square. So in my case, I maybe want to just go 1/4 inch all the way around and cut that out. So I think what I want to do is I want to make sure when I cut those out that this is flat. So it's almost easier to do it from the back side, except that you can't, you don't have the size there. So you kind of have to do it from the front. And again, it needs to be bigger. So the nice thing is, when you open a book, you end up, the pages aren't all stacked right on top of each other like they're going to be when it's closed. So the fact that you cut it out a little bigger helps. And then I can clean it up from the back where everything is stacked on top. So I'll maybe do that so that you can kind of see what I'm talking about here. So again, I have my, let's see if my drawing, which ends up looking kind of wonky, because when you're cutting these pages, you'll find as you do it, you keep trying to get closer, all the way to the edge, which means I end up kind of maybe doing it crooked and going a little outside the edge. Once you've made one of these, you'll see what I'm talking about, but you can see how it does not look perfect anymore. So I just need to maybe, using my clear ruler, at least I could see through it then. And I want to go some distance, realizing that my artwork is going to need to be, visible. So a 1/4 inch is pretty good. So I'm just going to draw, and this line will actually be straight because I'm using a ruler. So I just want to go at least a 1/4 inch larger than my opening. It's kind of nice if you can get it, no, that's pretty crooked, if you can get it kind of squared up, because when you go to cut your substrate, it's easier to cut something even than uneven. Okay, so I know those are kind of messy lines, but if you can see, my opening is this funny shape, and then I just went out and kind of made some straight lines a 1/4 inch larger. And I'm going to cut through all of these to my art piece. Now, I should kind of pay attention to this, because if you see, I'm only leaving myself a pretty narrow spot here. And the other thing I want to do is recess my magnet in that spot. And I'm going to use a hole punch to make the holes, but that's actually going to be kind of infringed. So I'm going to make this line a little further in, just so that I have plenty of room to punch my hole for my magnet. I'm going to be using, like I said, a standard hole punch, which is a little bit bigger around than my magnet. So I'm going to make this line and hopefully remember which one to cut. So maybe I'll cut that first so that I don't mess it up. And again, I want to have something protecting the back of my book. And if I hold these kind of up, I have a better chance of these kind of being where I want them to be. So this is probably the most awkward thing to try to cut, because I'm trying to open and I need to go on the inside line. See, I almost messed up already. And I can kind of hear when I'm cutting through to my cardboard, so I want to be careful there. And then I can save one of these as a pattern for my substrate, because they're not perfectly square. Maybe one of these earlier ones would have the corner cut out, so I can use this as a pattern. So now that's what is going to capture, my artwork's going to fit in this, and then I can attach it to, once these are all glued together. Now you can see over here, I need a little bit more room for it to capture there, so I do have to cut. But if I open some of these up, I have a feeling that some of the front ones, when my book is closed, I do have a little edge there, if you could see that. And that's because it's hard to cut these when the book is not all the way closed. So I'm going to trim now from this side. I can take these off so I'm flat. And I can try to get just the littlest edge off of this from this side. Okay, so when I glue those down, I could trim just a little bit more. I just want to make sure I have a place for my artwork to sit. So I do need to maybe go just a tiny bit more. Not very pretty, but it gave me that ledge that I need. Okay, so now I want to, before I start gluing all these pages together, I want to punch the holes in here for my magnet. And what I did before is I kind of just centered one on this side first. So it doesn't matter where it goes as long as they line up. So I'm just gonna grab a magnet and use my art glitter glue. Now I do need to kind of eyeball where that's going to go so that I make sure it's in the middle of this side. So I'm going to plop it here somewhere. And while that's still wet and I can move it, I can kind of eyeball, and I have that right in the center because I need to be able to punch my holes. So I want to give myself enough of an edge, and that looks pretty good. So I would let this dry before I put the other side on, before I punch my holes. Okay, so I'm going to let that dry. So while that is drying, I can now go ahead and put my front glass in because I have everything everything's cut. If at this point you needed to trim any more, even on your book block, you have the ability to still get in here and kind of, trim that more if you want. Now, the other thing that I didn't show you yet, and you could have done it, you could do it on this, is if you want to even this out, I did it on my front when I prepped this, is take an emery board or a piece of sandpaper and go along, clean this up so that it's all nice and smooth, and check that it looks even and all of that. You could do the same thing on this block if I wanted to smooth anything out, I had a high spot, I could also do that. I like it kind of looking tattery and seeing a little bit of that, so I'm going to leave mine like it is. So for this piece here, I want to go ahead and do something on my other ones. For example, on this one, you can see my pages are still the book pages. I didn't put a spacer piece in there, but I painted it black. So it's just, for this piece, that's just what I wanted to do. I didn't really care to see that being book edge. For these, I did like seeing that kind of with the little tatters even kind of sticking out. I liked that. But this edge here, I went ahead and painted that black. And I just used a Posca paint pen to do that. For this one, because I don't really have black on here, and I did this with my Distress Oxide Walnut Stain, I think I might go ahead and color that with my walnut stain. So normally I would be good and maybe I'll wear one glove. I have a glove sitting here so I don't stain my fingers. I don't have a little cloth here, so I'm just going to use a paper towel. If you have, a little dauber or something like that, you can. And I'm just going to go and darken up that edge. That just gives it a more finished look, I think. The other thing I would want to do is do my Dorland's wax. Apply it first on the cover, so I think I'll do that too before I put the glass in. Now, depending on what you do, you would just finish that, whether it's with a workable fixative or your Camar varnish, something like that, if you've painted your cover. I just want to make sure I get in all the corners and don't have any light spots showing. Okay. And I was just using from Ranger Distressed Spray Stain. You could use, this is walnut stain is the color. You could use any kind of product like that you have. I also do furniture finishing. I used to do a lot of it. So I have, stain waxes and that sort of thing. You could use anything like that. Brown shoe polish would work, honestly. So I have that. I like that better with that finish. And then I want my Dorland's. This is just Dorland's Cold Wax Medium. And it is just to do a protective finish on this. So if you have not used it before, you just apply it. I need a cloth or something. This is just a leftover scrap from a flannel shirt. And I'm just going to apply it, and then you want to let it dry. It doesn't take very much at all. You're going to apply it as if you were applying it to artwork, just like you're waxing anything. It's just going to give it a protective finish so none of the stain comes off on my hands or anything. And then you're going to buff it to a little bit of a sheen after it's dried. And if you haven't been following me, I put it down in the description. I have a running list of all the different materials and products and things that I use in this whole playlist. So it just keeps growing in each video. Okay, so this has a nice protective coat of wax on it now. And I'm just going to let it dry, and then later I'll buff that out, and that'll be nice and official looking. Even though it's an old vintagey thing, it'll have a nice finish on it. Okay, so this should be dry. Maybe I'll go ahead and do this, then I can start do all my gluing at once. So I tried doing this with a little pen. I don't have a paint pen in here right now to do it, but I'm going to put a little dab of glue and just touch it to the other side, and that way I'll see where I need to make my hole. So I'm just going to cover that just to leave a nice white blob on the other side. Clean that off. And now I don't know if you can see it, but I can see the little white circle there. That's where I'm going to punch my hole for my other magnet, because I'm going to recess it. So again, I've already tested this for size, and just my standard size hole punch is going to make that hole a little bit bigger than my magnet. So I'm just going to see if I can see where that is now. Maybe not the best method, but it worked. And then I need to go through all of these that are not glued down. And again, I want to just go to the thickness of my magnet for this. This was the thickness of the artwork. So I'm going to maybe not go do all of them at one time and test my magnet. So I need a few more. That feels pretty flush. I'm going to go ahead and close it jumped of course to my magnet, but I want to see that I'm going through, and you see I have a little bit of a gap, so that means I can go a little bit deeper. So I'm going to go through the rest of these, and that should be, in a perfect world, actually that's better. So I could have saved out a few more pages even of these, and now I can't do that, but I think that's going to be fine. Okay, so now I can glue, I'm going to leave that so I don't lose it. I can glue these down to that backing because my artwork's just going to sit here once I cut it. And these, I'm going to do the same thing, glue all these, but I need to put my glass in first, and then the whole thing is going to get glued down. Okay, this one fell out, so I'm going to have to add it in. But for this, I'm just going to use my Yoo-Hoo glue stick. I found was the easiest thing to use. So I'm going to go ahead and glue these down, and then I will be back. Okay, so I have glued the front ones down. Now what I'll probably do on this one, these pages are all really uneven, and you can see the coloration is now different because this has glue on it. Is once I glue the back also, I'm going to do another coat of the PVA glue over the whole thing, and that'll just make it more uniform. But now I can also do the same thing on this side, and then I'll clean the glass and put it in. So I just really took from because you want them to all lay flat with a book block, I just go with my glue stick and do the same thing on this one. Go around the edges, and then one at a time, you lay your pages down, and it's nice and easy to line these up with the previous page. Sometimes they tear like this, like these did, but they get glued down, so it's fine. So I'm just gonna, again, go one at a time. And glue each of these pages down. And you want to make sure your hole punch is lined up so that your magnet will fit. Okay, so I'm going to finish this and I'll be right back. Okay, so I have my pages glued together, so I can now glue my magnet in there, and hopefully that will work. So I need some of my art glitter glue. And drop that in. And then I need to let that dry, and then it will attach. Okay, so I have my piece here. I have a pattern I can now make for my artwork, and that will go next. But in the meantime, if I don't open this, I can let this close, I guess, till it's dry. I can clean my glass and put that in now also. So I have my little piece, and it will fit right inside that little opening. And then I'll use my art glitter glue to glue the cover down, but I think I'll at least clean this first. I just think that this curved glass with this old book is such a thing, and I haven't made the artwork for this yet, but I'm going to show you. I'm tossing some ideas in my head while I've been making this, but the art gods were with me when I took this book apart, and I had the most serendipitous thing happen. So I think it's going to be part of my collage, because because I like antiques and vintage things so much, but I also like the colorful gel printing and all that. I mean, you can do those in more neutrals, and I actually have a kit in my Etsy shop of like faux wallpaper that I did on my gel plate, and they're an old kind of vintagey look. So you could do something like that. So I may have to make some more papers for this collage or dig through my bin over there, but I'll show you what I found here. Okay, that's pretty clean. So I'm going to just plop that where it fits perfectly in that little spot, and then glue that in there. It would probably be smart to, glue this first, but I think I'll just be really careful. and do it after. So I definitely need to put some weight on this so that it really sticks. So I'm going to have to weight it down, and then I'll be back and talk about, well, I'll let this dry. I want to make sure it's very squared up. And then I'll be back. Okay, so I am back, and it's actually the next day. I let this dry, and I went ahead and did another coat of the PVA bookbinding glue around the whole outer edge. And I like doing that because now that you can see, I don't see the difference in coloration, and you just see the water spots, the age spots on the book, and it just kind of made it a cohesive kind of finished look, even though the pages are all kind of wonky, where, you know, it's an old book that was used and some of these middle pages were starting to come loose. But I really like how that turned out, and my magnet closure is working, and I still need to put a hanger on it, but I'll do that later, and then we'll have it hanging. The other thing nice about shadow boxes is you can also just stand them on a shelf, and you don't have to actually hang them on the wall. And I kind of like doing that too. You know, stack of books and then a book shadow box on top is kind of nice. So I wanted to show, I did go ahead and used one of the pages that I cut out of this larger back piece to create my substrate. It is an odd shape. I do need to trim it a little bit. I didn't test it before I turned the camera back on, but that's going to fit in there. I do need to trim a little bit, and then I can use my hinge tape, which is also from Langnickel, same company that I get the PVA bookbinding glue, all my bookbinding supplies, and that is just some hinge tape that's just it's archival, and it's just a really thin tape that won't damage your artwork, that you can use to attach it in. And then you could put another clean piece of paper or something over that for a more professional look. And then I like to put my title and when I made it and my name and all that on here. So I'm ready to go to, you know, create my artwork on this now, knowing that I have a little edge that won't show. But I wanted to share with you my serendipitous thing. When I was cutting out the front section, that little section that I had saved, when I was cutting that out for the glass, I didn't go through and look at those pages. It was just, you know, 2 millimeters thickness, something like that. And so I just cut those out, and I had them in a pile, and I was starting to kind of think about what I wanted to do for artwork. And one of the pages, you know, they're all kind of messed up on my table, was peeking out, was actually a colored picture. And it was just, I was looking at this was a Native American book. And so it has like a silhouette of a Native American here, and then the ship off in the distance. But it looks like his arm is reaching down, and then the book plate with the title and the author and all that was on the front. This was one of the pages that I cut out, and his arm was reaching up. And I found the other part of the page in the book, and there was an eagle up here, but it got cut off because I wasn't paying attention. I was just cutting this out. But I just loved how it looks like he's reaching down and he's reaching up. And I just loved that juxtaposition. So I don't know how much of this I will use, but I think I want to cut this out and maybe use, you know, I'm trying to have all these projects be gel print projects. And this video ended up being an antique book because I had already done the other 2 shadow boxes with the gel print collage. But I'm going to try to do that with this too, but I want to use this, at least parts of this, with my collage. And then it's also colorful. Some of my gel prints, when I would do my mark making and things, ended up having sort of that kind of native-ish, some kind of patterns on it. So I think I can still create some type of collage artwork and have it kind of go with the theme of this series that I'm doing, but do it in a vintage style, combining it with some vintage things, which, you know, is something that I also love to do. So I need to do the artwork and put some hanger on the back, and then we'll be finished with this one. And I'm wondering if you'd like, I do have the 2 Reader's Digest that I did. I did record to music, no talking, my actual creating the collages. And I'm thinking about doing the same thing when I create this collage. So if you like something like that, I may end up putting it at the end of this video, and you can just watch those if you've watched to the end. But I thought they would be fun as shorts, but shorts are part of a larger video. But you might like videos like that from time to time where it's just me creating to music and not really explaining anything. So let me know in the comments if that's something that you would like to see. It's not something that I had always been comfortable doing because I still feel like I'm such a new artist. So let me know if you would be interested in seeing anything like that. And I did think I would show you this because I do think I'm going to do another video. This isn't finished yet. It's actually still a little tacky. It needs a few more layers. I have a few different ways that I like to finish artwork that I've been learning about. And I have had people ask me questions about what do I use for this or that or the other thing. Usually I'm including that in the video, like finishing this one with the Dorland's wax, but maybe they haven't watched all the videos, and so they're asking a question that may be answered in a different video. But I thought what I might do is, because I have been learning different ways, the technique that I'm doing on this one is one that I've done on some of the wood cradles. And I'm thinking when I rob the glass out of old picture frames to use for shadow boxes or something else, I want to still use the frame and put artwork in it, but I need it to be protected and where you could at least dust it off without glass. So I'm thinking of doing a video with just maybe all the different ways I've been finishing things. So if that's something you would be interested in, please let me know down in the comments also. And I haven't quite finished this one, but I did want to show you, since I did rob the glass for some future projects, that I want to know what you think. What do you think about using old frames on a piece that's more abstract and contemporary looking? So let me know in the comments what you think of this video, and I'm still thinking up new ideas to use with gel print. So have a great rest of your day. Now go make something. Bye.